In paper number 1, a thesis statement is where you're going to synthesize all the arguments you've made during the paper into one qualified examination of what a set of artifacts tell us about attention in American culture. So let's break that down. First, we want to make sure we understand the rubric. And to understand the rubric, we need to understand what's behind it. And what's behind the rubric is the second course outcome or student learning outcome. We've talked about these since the beginning of the semester. They're on the front page of the syllabus. And our second course outcome is about synthesizing and creating qualified arguments. To achieve that objective, the rubric outlines several requirements for the thesis. First, we're going to answer that guiding question on the level of the paper as a whole. What do these artifacts collectively tell us about this tension that you've chosen to write about? And then we're going to learn two structures that will help us achieve that. We're going to learn how to write a list thesis, where you list all of the artifacts and what they say, and a range thesis where you present a few artifacts that represent the range of responses in your thesis. So let's get into looking at those possibilities. Here's an example of the range structure. You can see de Tocqueville's Democracy in America is one text, and the other is a painting by George Catlin. And what the writer is saying is that these texts show that racial hierarchy prevailed over equality in America before the Civil War. So in this case, the thesis is arguing that one value triumphs over another. The second example we want to look at is, again, a group of paintings, Jonathan Copley, with some Civil War songs. And here we see the writer positioning America in a balance, talking about how Americans struggle to balance these two forms of masculinity. So those are both range structure thesis statements. They both identify a range of the artifacts discussed in the text, and they tell us what collectively these artifacts suggest about the tension. In the first one, we get an example of one side of the tension, one value dominating another. In the other, we see a collective striving for balance. So there is no formula about the relationship between the values and the tension, right? It can be one toward one side, it can be toward the other, it can be a mix of the two. You go where the artifacts take you. Let's look at the list structure. And again, you'll see in these list structure sentences the same kind of thing, except instead of just mentioning two, all of the artifacts examined are listed. In this case, both these examples, it's 3. And again, you've got one thesis is an example of one value having priority over another, and the other is an example of a shift between the values. So there's lots of flexibility, interpretive flexibility here for you based on what you actually find in the artifacts. And that's where the idea of qualification comes in. We're constructing qualified arguments in this paper because we're grounding ourselves in what these artifacts say and not making large, unsupported generalizations. Okay, so let's take a look at, as a way to wrap up our conversation, Megan's thesis from the paper, the sample essay. And as you can see here, this is the classic list thesis. She lists all 4 of the different artifacts she's going to look at and argues that they ultimately say that racial hierarchy overcomes the stirrings of racial equality in America in the 19th century. So the actual sample essay thesis is quite strong. It follows the list model, and it does everything we want our thesis to do. It identifies the works, and it answers the guiding question, and it clearly positions the artifacts collectively on the spectrum. And that's what we want to be thinking about. We want to think about our thesis as a summary of the arguments that we've constructed in our topic sentences. It is to go back to the word we started this video with, a synthesis of the arguments we've made in our paragraph that, when pulled together, constitutes a qualified argument about attention in American culture. Good luck with this. Don't hesitate to reach out to me with phone, text, email, whatever works for you. And remember my online office hours too, a great place to come in with some questions. See you in Blackboard.